Let's get right into it. Number 10. The Window Tax Collector. Back in 1696 England, King William III decided to tax people based on how many windows their houses had. So your job was literally counting windows. The logic was simple. Rich people had big houses with lots of windows, so they should pay more taxes. Tax collectors walked around town, counting windows and collecting money. People started bricking up their windows to avoid paying. A house with 20 windows last week would mysteriously have only 5 the next. Homeowners would claim the windows never existed, while tax collectors stared at obvious brick patches on the walls. People painted fake windows on the brick to keep their houses looking nice. Tax collectors knew exactly what was happening. But technically, if there's no window, there's no tax. Doctors started complaining about people living in dark, poorly ventilated homes just to save money. By 1851, the job had become pointless. Most houses looked like they were designed by vampires, with barely any windows left to count. The government finally abolished the tax. You can still see bricked-up windows in old buildings across England today. Number 9. The Guild Inspector. You want to start a business in a medieval city. There's this guy whose whole job is making sure you can't. The Guild Inspector was the medieval version of a bouncer. Instead of checking IDs at clubs, they checked if you had permission to make stuff. If you wanted to be a craftsman, like a baker, blacksmith, or candlestick maker, you had to join a guild. These guilds were exclusive clubs that controlled who could make what within the city walls. The guild inspector walked around town making sure nobody was secretly baking bread or fixing shoes without being in the club. Some clever folks figured out a loophole. The guild inspector only had power inside the city walls. These medieval entrepreneurs just set up shop right outside the city walls. It's like when you were a kid and your sibling was holding their finger an inch from your face saying, "I'm not touching you." These outside-the-wall businesses became known as suburbs. That's actually where that word comes from. They were absolutely crushing it because they didn't have to follow any of the guild's rules. They could charge whatever they wanted, hire whoever they wanted, and make things however they wanted. The guild inspector could only watch helplessly as more people realized they could just walk outside the city walls and do whatever they wanted. It's like when your parents put parental controls on the home Wi-Fi, but you just use your phone's data instead. Eventually, these suburban workshops became so successful that the whole guild system started falling apart. The job of guild inspector became about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Number 8. The draft board clerk. Draft board clerks held the power of life and death in their filing cabinets. They decided who went to war and who stayed home. During the Vietnam War, they were some of the most powerful people in town. They processed deferments and maintained draft records. People started figuring out ways to game the system. First, there was the college loophole. If you were enrolled in higher education, you could get a student deferment. Everyone was signing up for classes. Some people stayed in college for years, collecting degrees. The clerks had to process mountains of paperwork from universities. Then came the medical exemptions. Flat feet meant you were out. A bad back kept you home. Asthma got you a get-out-of-war-free card. People were suddenly developing all sorts of creative medical conditions. The clerks were drowning in doctors' notes and medical records. The conscientious objector status was the real kicker. This was originally meant for religious groups like the Quakers, who had moral objections to violence. But people realized you didn't actually need to be religious to claim it. You just had to prove you had strong moral or ethical objections to war. Suddenly, everyone was a philosopher. Draft board clerks were reading through endless essays about peace, love, and why violence is bad. By the early 1970s, the whole system was falling apart. The clerks were processing more exemptions than actual draftees. When the draft ended in 1973, the job of draft board clerk just vanished. These people who once held such power over life and death were now as obsolete as a typewriter repairman. Number 7. The State Censor. State censors in the Soviet Union sat in dusty offices all day, reading other people's mail and deciding what they were allowed to say. They were like bouncers at the world's strictest club, except instead of checking IDs, they checked every book, newspaper, and personal letter. If they found something they didn't like, they'd grab their red pen and start slashing away. People started getting creative with how to share banned information. They created something called samizdat, which means self-publishing in Russian. If you had a banned book like George Orwell's Animal Farm, you'd type it out on thin paper, making as many carbon copies as possible. Then you'd pass these copies to trusted friends, who would make their own copies. The censors couldn't stop what they couldn't find. Some would memorize entire books and recite them at secret gatherings. Others would write banned poems on cigarette papers, which could be quickly eaten if the authorities showed up. People even cut banned music onto discarded X-ray films. They called it bone music. By the 1980s, there were so many underground publications that the censors couldn't keep up. The job of state censor became completely useless. Number 6. The meter reader. Back in the 1980s, meter readers went house to house every month, checking those spinning dials on your electric meter. It was a pretty decent job. You got to work outdoors and walk around neighborhoods. Those old meters had a fatal flaw. They used magnetic mechanisms to track power usage. People figured out that if you slapped a powerful magnet on your meter, those little dials would slow down, or even stop completely. Suddenly, your power bill was suspiciously low. Utility companies started noticing houses using suspiciously little power, a family of 5 using less electricity than a single light bulb. But catching someone in the act was nearly impossible. The moment the meter reader showed up, that magnet would mysteriously disappear. This went on for years, until utility companies started installing smart meters, digital ones that couldn't be fooled by magnets. These new meters could send readings directly to the company. No more need for someone to physically check your meter. Thousands of meter readers found themselves joining the ranks of lamplighters and switchboard operators. Those smart meters aren't perfect either. People have already found ways to hack them. Number 5. The radio license inspector. In the 1930s, radio license inspectors went door to door checking for unpaid radio license fees. These guys were like tax collectors of the airwaves. They carried special detection equipment to catch people hiding radios. Governments wanted to control the airwaves and make money. Then people figured out the crystal radio loophole. You could build it with wire, a rusty razor blade, and pencil lead. No batteries, no electricity. It ran purely on radio waves. It was invisible to inspectors. No radio cabinet, no power cord, just innocent-looking bits you could scatter like regular junk. People hid them in flower pots, books, even tea kettles. Inspectors were losing their minds. They knew people were listening but couldn't prove how. It was technically legal. These weren't radio sets, as defined by law. Underground networks shared building instructions. Kids learned in science class, then taught their parents how to dodge the fees. The whole inspection system collapsed. You can't enforce a law when everyone's found a legal way around it. Next time you're streaming music for free, remember the Crystal Radio Rebels. They were the original pirates of the airwaves, taking down an entire profession with nothing but wire and a razor blade. Number 4. The salt tax collector, Gabelou. The salt tax collector in pre-revolutionary France. These guys had one job, making sure people paid ridiculous taxes on salt. Some French citizens were forced to buy 7 kilos of salt per person per year, whether they needed it or not. The salt tax wasn't the same everywhere. Some regions paid 100 times more than others for the exact same salt. This created a perfect opportunity for smugglers. They'd buy salt in the low-tax regions and sell it in the high-tax ones. These smugglers formed entire armies called false sauniers, literally fake salt makers. Some of these groups had hundreds of armed men. They'd march through the countryside with hundreds of horses loaded with contraband salt. They'd hollow out loaves of bread and fill them with salt. Some would even train dogs to run salt across borders at night. The dogs would wear special harnesses packed with salt. The Gabelou didn't stand a chance. If they tried to stop these salt armies, they'd often end up dead in a ditch. But if they didn't try to stop them, they'd lose their jobs. The whole system was so hated that when the French Revolution came, the salt tax and its collectors were some of the first things to go. Number 3. The Conscription Officer. In 1863, thousands of men didn't want to fight in the Civil War, so they went to the dentist. Soldiers needed their front teeth to tear open paper gunpowder cartridges. No front teeth meant you couldn't load your gun properly, and if you couldn't load your gun, you were useless as a soldier. The loophole was simple: get your front teeth pulled out. The conscription officers couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't prove you pulled your teeth out on purpose. Maybe you just had really bad dental hygiene. This loophole got so popular that some dentists started advertising military extractions. The military caught on pretty quick. They tried making rules about recently extracted teeth. But how could you prove when someone lost their teeth? It's not like teeth come with timestamps. The conscription officers were stuck. They knew people were gaming the system, but they couldn't stop it. Some officers even reported seeing the same dentist's handiwork over and over again. They couldn't arrest every dentist in town. By the end of the Civil War, this loophole had gotten so big that some units were having trouble finding enough qualified recruits. An entire military position defeated by a bunch of missing teeth. Number 2. The Turnpike ticket issuer. They handed you paper tickets at toll booths. The ticket showed where you entered. When you exited, you paid based on distance. People found a way to game this system so badly, it killed an entire profession. The scam worked like this. You're driving from New York to Philadelphia. That's expensive in tolls. So you pull into a rest stop and find someone driving the opposite direction. You exchange tickets. Now it looks like you both only drove a few miles. The toll booth operators had no way to prove otherwise. They were just looking at a piece of paper. The toll authorities were losing millions. The ticket issuers started noticing something weird. They'd hand out tickets for cars going north, but those same ticket numbers would show up at southern exits. The authorities tried everything to stop it. They changed ticket colors, added watermarks, stationed police at rest stops. But humans are creative when it comes to saving money. Eventually, the whole system had to change. EZ-Pass and electronic tolling arrived. No more paper tickets, no more swapping, and no more ticket issuers. The profession disappeared because people couldn't resist a simple rest stop scam. Today, those ticket booths are ghost towns. Most are automated or torn down. They remind us of a time when outsmarting the system was as simple as making a friend at a rest stop. Number 1. The long-distance operator. In 1960, calling your aunt in California wasn't simple. First, you had to talk to a long-distance operator who manually connected your call. These operators were like the air traffic controllers of the phone world, connecting calls across the country using a massive switchboard. It was a huge industry. At its peak, AT&T employed over 350,000 operators. Then someone hacked the entire system with a whistle from a Captain Crunch cereal box. The phone system used special tones to route calls and handle billing. By complete accident, the free whistle in Captain Crunch cereal boxes could produce the exact same tone operators used. The whistle made a perfect 2600 Hz tone, the magic frequency that told the phone system to make free calls. A guy named John Draper discovered this loophole. He built a device called a blue box that could make all the tones needed to control the phone network. Suddenly, anyone with a blue box could pretend to be an operator and make free calls anywhere. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak got their start making and selling blue boxes in college dorm rooms. This was before Apple. The phone companies were losing millions to these phone freakers, as they were called. The phone companies couldn't just change the tones because their entire network was built around them. It would be like trying to change the width of train tracks across the entire country overnight. So instead, they had to completely redesign how calls were routed, moving to a digital system that couldn't be fooled by audio tones. And just like that, the job of long-distance operator started to disappear. By the 1980s, most long-distance calls were automated. Those 350,000 operators, their jobs literally vanished because of a cereal box whistle. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.